Hello, welcome to my talk, Testing.Platform, the new way to run .NET tests. I'm Jakob, and I'm happy to be here on behalf of the .NET testing team and to be able to show you what we've been working on. So, Testing.Platform is a new, lightweight platform to eventually replace VSTest. VSTest was created in 2012 and was introduced in Visual Studio 2012 together with Test Explorer. And it was created as a platform to offer a unified experience for testing framework and tests and running tests in Visual Studio. So you can create the same reports, you can run tests the same way in Azure DevOps through the VSTest task, no matter which framework you are using, it being NUnit, XUnit, MSTest, or something else. At that time, Visual Studio was on Windows. We had .NET Framework that was on Windows. We didn't have a cross-platform experience that came in 2017 with .NET Core. And at the beginning, we probably didn't know how amazing change that will be for the .NET ecosystem. For .NET Core, support for VSTest was added, and we got .NET Test and .NET VSTest commands. But there was never a proper rewrite where everything would be done in a way that it should be done in .NET Core. In 2019, our team was established, and we saw some cool additions to the .NET ecosystem, such as ARM64 or Native AOT. And when we were adding support for those into VSTest, we found ourselves struggling with that a little bit. And so we started thinking how we can change the test platform to be more aligned with .NET Test. And we started by writing one from scratch, which we now released in 2024 and called it Testing.Platform. And we released it together with MSTest 3.2. When we were creating this new testing platform, we built it on 6 pillars to be deterministic, portable, future-proof, extensible, performant, and secure. Let's look into each point one by one. So, deterministic. For us, that means that running the same tests with the same configuration should produce the same result. It should produce it on your machine, on build server, on your colleague's machine that is helping you figure out the problem with your tests, or maybe on our machines when you are sharing a repro of your problem. This was driven by customer complaints, of course, and so one such complaint might be, my tests are crashing because they pick up wrong version of test adapter DLL from nuget cache. And so this kind of mix and matching of different DLLs inside of bin folders, inside of other places where they're picked up by VSTest is a common source of problems. And so we got rid of that totally. Now we have no such thing. We only have static extension registration that we do through MS Build. And we don't have any reflection lookup. We don't have folder scanning. We don't look for files based on naming convention. Everything is very static. And we also don't have any custom assembly resolver inside of the platform, which is another source of a lot of problems. We want the platform to be portable. So when the project or the tests are portable, we want them to be detached from their surrounding environment. So for example, a complaint would be, my tests are failing on the server, but locally they work and I cannot debug the problem. And I don't know about you, but I really hate that situation when it only reproduces on server. And so when you are downloading your tests from your server, you want to just grab the bin folder and that should be enough to reproduce locally. You don't want to be thinking what exact version of .NET SDK I have installed on the server, what exact version of Visual Studio I have installed there, what exact packages I have restored in the NuGet cache, and all of those can influence the run with the current test platform. Also in some legacy or in some backward compatibility scenarios, we are sharing adapters between projects with the current platform, but not with the new one. So everything should be more portable and much easier to reproduce on different systems. We want our platform to be future-proof. And so because we saw a lot of those amazing improvements in .NET, And so we want test projects to not be special in the ecosystem anymore. We want them to be easily manipulated, like if you would be manipulating a console application. And that way, new form factors and new architectures should require minimal effort to adopt, both on our side, so we don't have to do a lot of work, and on your side, so you can very easily start dogfooding new things. You can use them as soon as they are available, and you can also test them as soon as they are available. And so, for example, with Native AOT, with the new platform, we created it from scratch to be Native AOT compatible. And we also added support into MSTest for Native AOT in a preview. Another complaint from a customer was dotnet trace is a performance investigation tool in .NET, and it's very hard to use with tests. And so now the test projects inside of the new testing platform are just simple XE executables, and what you can do with a console, you can do with tests, and that's really, really important point, and we will demo that soon. Then we want the platform to be extensible. And so internally, it's built around extensibility. A lot of the things it does are extensions internally, and we also have extensions that are external, such as hang dump that we will see, which is similar to the blame functionality inside of VSTest. And so we want us and framework authors and service providers to have easy time providing additional functionality that will be added to the current testing platform. So for example, a customer complaint was, my tests are flaky, how do I retry them? And so we created an extension for retrying tests and other extensions that help. Also, we don't want the new platform to depend on common libraries, such as in VSTest, we rely on newtons of JSON. And so when someone wants to try, the author of newtons of JSON tries to test newtons of JSON, how does he do it? Well, it cannot be done with VSTest because it already depends on the version of that library. And so the core platform, the new testing platform, doesn't have any dependencies apart from what ships inside of the runtime. So that way you can test hopefully everything. We want our platform to be performant because you shouldn't be spending time running the platform itself. You should be spending CPU and memory on running your tests. And so the overhead of the testing platform, of the new testing platform, is minimal. So a complaint might be test running is slow, VSTest console takes too much memory. And so the new platform reduced the number of processes that we start and the serialization between processes to a minimum. And so now teams see 30% increase in performance just by moving to the new testing platform and doing nothing else. And then last but not least, we want the platform to be secure because security is very important. And this, of course, needs to be attacked from multiple places, but we minimize the dependencies. So detecting or having vulnerable dependencies is difficult when you don't have any. And if we do have dependencies that are vulnerable, maybe in some extension, or if there is a problem found directly in the platform, we ship everything, the whole platform, as NuGet packages. So we can go to NuGet, we can mark it as having a security problem, and you will get a warning in your build. And also we can very fast ship fixes, maybe even the next day. So that's a lot of talking. Let's go to showing some demos. So let's switch for that into my Visual Studio Code. And here in Visual Studio Code, I have a new project that I created through a template, .NET New MSTest, and I specified test runner MSTest by saying -- test runner MSTest. This created this project, and it has two new properties. Enable MSTest runner. MSTest runner is a new runner that is based on the testing platform and is meant for MSTest, as the name suggests. And then the output type of the project is set to XE, to executable. And this is very important because then you can take the application and you can do what you can do with a console application, you can do with a test application. So let's go and let's build it. So we do .NET build. That builds the project. Any second now, and we got a DLL. We can copy it here and we can change that to XE, run it, and it runs my tests. Very fast. I didn't have to look up any other tool. I didn't have to run with .NET Test. I didn't have to even have the SDK available once I have this application. So I can take this app, I can move it to a system that doesn't have .NET SDK, and I can run it there. I can also use .NET Run to run this app, and I'm not going to specify the parameters just yet. And this is a convenient way of rebuilding your application and running it as well. So if you are changing stuff inside, you can just run your app. This way it will be rebuilt and you will run your tests. But again, we are not bringing in any additional console. We are not bringing any additional software. This just runs as a console application and it runs the tests inside of it. So to show this point even further, I want to show you how we can move those tests to run inside of a Docker container. For that, I will switch into my folder, 02 Dockerize. I have a project that looks totally the same as before. I just added 2 properties based on the documentation, and I will be using a functionality that was added into .NET Build. And it wasn't thinking about how to use it with tests, but it was thinking how to use it with console application. So now I can use this target publish container, and that will, without any knowledge of Docker, without any creating of a Docker file, it will just create an image for me that will have my app, and I will be able to just run it directly in Docker. So documentation tells me use those 2 properties is publishable and enable SDK container support. I added both of them, copying them from the documentation, and then I can run .NET publish container. That's the target that I need to call. And then I'm calling -tl false, which will temporarily just disable my terminal logger so I can see more information on the screen about what's going on. And what I want you to see is that we're basing this on .NET runtime, not .NET SDK, .NET runtime. And runtime is just barely enough. It's just enough to run an application, but you cannot use runtime to develop and build the application. So that's what we are basing the container on. We have just the runtime, and it created this hello world tests for me. And then I can go and call docker run hello world tests image. And just like that, it runs my tests inside of a Docker container. You can see here that we are using Linux. So we're running inside of a Linux container directly here on Windows. So this easy it is to take the new Testing.Platform test app, move it inside of Docker. I didn't have to write any Docker file. I didn't have to have any knowledge. And now I can just go and run my tests on Linux very easily somewhere on a server. So what I want you to remember from this demo is that the test projects in Testing.Platform are now built as executables. And so you can manipulate them, you can combine them with other tests, with other applications like you would combine a console application. So you can use .NET Trace, you can put them inside of a container, and so on. Now let's demo some extensibility and the MSTest project SDK. So for that, I will move into this folder. I will just quickly run this to switch to the correct folder, and then we will again look at the project. So in this case, I'm having the same kind of project and I have two extensions. Maybe you also noticed them in the previous demos. I have Microsoft Testing, extensions code coverage, and TRX report, and extensions for the new platform are packaged as NuGet packages and shipped as them, so you can very easily install them into your project. But I don't want to be using code coverage or TRX report. I want to be using hangdump. And hangdump is an extension that allows you to wait for a timeout. If a test passes this timeout that I'm specifying, hangdump will kill the process and it will help me find tests that are hanging. And so what I want to show you here is that I have this test class, which has a test that runs for 30 seconds, and that's longer than 5 seconds. So for me, that's a hanging test or test that's being too slow. And then I have a bunch of other tests, like 300 of them, that are running quite fast. They are just sleeping for 100 milliseconds. And so here, I want to be calling this command. So .NET run -- and then you have to specify a space. This is a kind of a quirk of .NET run. So you do .NET run space -- space, and then you specify the parameters for your app. And so I'm saying hangdump and -- hangdump timeout 5 seconds because I want the longest test to take 5 seconds. Otherwise, I want to kill the process. And so my tests are running, and maybe notice this really nice progress bar that we have now. I finished the 300 tests, and now I'm waiting for the 30-second test to finish, and it didn't finish. It expired the time, and it was caught by the hangdump dumper, which dumped the process, and now I have a dump. And so I can take this memory dump and I can take it down from the CI server to my local and see exactly what happened in the process, or I can use it locally maybe to see what exactly was hanging, and this way I can determine why my tests are hanging. So that's one of the extensions that we have, and you might be familiar with it already from VSTest. There it's called blame hang. But maybe let's now look at the project. So we have an extension and we installed it through a package, and now we have like 3 of them. And you might be thinking, if I have 20 of those extensions, that's going to be very difficult to maintain. Like there's this version, now suddenly code coverage has a different version. How do I align them? Seems kind of difficult. And we were thinking the same thing, and we were getting also the same feedback. And so we came up with MSTest SDK. So let's compare those two projects. Here in the new one, we have project and we specify MSTest.SDK and then the version of the SDK I want. And I can also generate it from this template, .NET new MSTest -- SDK. And in the old one, on the top, I only had the standard Microsoft Net SDK. So in the new MSTest SDK driven project, I have the MSTest SDK, the version. I can also specify it in global JSON. And then I have only a bunch of properties. So the target framework and so on, the standard stuff. And then I'm using a property to just enable the extension, which is called enable, and then the name of the extension. Microsoft Testing Extensions Hangdump, and I set it to true, and that will install my extension with the correct version inside of the project, and then there's nothing else. So that's the whole project file. And so then I have in the test class totally the same thing as before. I just want to be switching into this folder. And then I will be going here and I will run the same command as before, and exactly the same thing as before should happen. We run the 300 tests, we finish them, and then we wait for 5 seconds for that last test to finish, be killed, collect a hangdump, and exactly that thing happened. So MSTest SDK, really cool way of managing your dependencies, your extensions. inside of your project. But I want to show you one more extension, and that extension is called hot reload. And for that, I will have to switch into my Visual Studio. And here in Visual Studio, I have a solution which is using the SDK again, and I'm using a different version to enable the extension. So maybe if you're still not happy, if it's still too complicated to add the enable for every single extension, you can use something that's called a test extension profile. So by default, we now ship 3 of them. We have the default, we have all Microsoft, and we have none. So by just a single property, you can select multiple extensions to be installed. And so in this case, I'm using the all Microsoft, which will install all the extensions that we're shipping for the testing platform, and that includes the hot reload extension. To further enable the hot reload extension, I need to specify this environment variable Testing.Platform hot reload enabled. And then I can go and I can run my app, just like I would with a console application. It's building now for a second. And I want to move it here and move this to the other half, and also zoom this up a little bit so you can see it better. And then the last thing that I want to do is that I want to check if I have this hot reload on file save enabled, and I do. So all is good. I will go into my test class, and you can see there is an assertion that says hello net9, and I will make it a little outdated and say hello net8, and I will save right now. And just when I saved, the test refreshed and the test ran, and now it's broken because the actual value is outdated. So I will delete it, set it back to 9, and press Ctrl S. And I couldn't even leave the key, and the test ran and updated my results. So hot reload is integrating with the hot reload capability. It makes running tests interactively quite easy. You can use it together with filters, and it's really good experience of debugging and running your tests. So that's hot reload. Let's switch back into the presentation. And so we have some cool extensions like hot reload, retry, the amazing code coverage. We have crash dump, hang dump. We have support for fakes. We have output with progress. We have TRX. There's a lot to unpack. You can read all of that in our documentation. But your extensions don't have to limit themselves to reports or some basic stuff. You can also author a completely new testing framework like Tom did with NUnit, and he was a great driver of the design and of the stuff that we were adding into the test platform, into the new testing platform. So definitely go check out that new testing framework. Talking about community-provided frameworks, we cannot omit XUnit and NUnit. So let's see how those work together with Testing.Platform. And for that, I will switch into my Visual Studio Code again. And here I have my solution in this folder. So I will go here. I will again run this to switch the correct folder, and I have this testing platform in VS solution. So I will do .NET, that's not .NET build. That will build my solution, and I will get those DLLs, and now I can show you how they run like I did before. So we will go and we will change this to executable. Thank you very much. And so here inside of this project, we enable NUnit runner, just like we did with MSTest. So here we say enable NUnit runner. We also say output type XE. And you should be using this preview version of NUnit free test adapter to be able to do this. So to be able to activate the new mode. Those packages are just available on nuget.org, so it's very easy. You just have to update the version, and then we can go and we can run a NUnit. I don't know what I did, and that doesn't work. Oh, I have it to false. Why do I have it to false? So we build one more time, we run it, and now it runs through the testing platform and it executes my test just like it did before with MSTest runner. So NUnit supports in the preview version the new testing platform, and we are super happy about that. And we can move to XUnit. So for XUnit, I will copy this. I will again rewrite that to XE, run it, and you can see that it ran my test through the testing platform runner as well. So it also works together with XUnit. And let's look at the project and how we enable it. In here, the property name is slightly different. So it's called Use Microsoft Testing Platform Runner. And so that's the property that you need to use. And you also need to use those three preview packages on NuGet. Again, they're available on nuget.org as you would expect. And so NUnit and XUnit, they both now support testing platform, but they both require so far the preview versions packages to be used. And so if you're using NUnit or XUnit, please go and try those versions and post feedback either to us or to the respective frameworks on their respective repos. We are very grateful for feedback and for maybe potential fixes and PRs from you. So now for the last demo, we have to look at Visual Studio because a lot of us use Visual Studio for writing code and then .NET Test because that's how people usually run tests these days. So let's switch to that. And for this, I will stay in this folder. And the whole time I was telling you, don't use .NET Test, use .NET Run. But let's see what happened if we actually run .NET Test. So I ran it, it builds my projects, and all of the projects execute. And this is what I was hoping for, because we are working hard at keeping backwards compatibility, and testing frameworks authors are as well. And so we are leaning back on VSTest when we're running .NET Test. So you can migrate to testing platform. You can reap the benefits of having testing platform, the portability, the ability to just easily pack your test projects into a Docker container, for example. But then you don't have to break everything. You don't have to break every single flow that you have. You can, in some cases, again, rely on the current VSTest platform. We are working on a new solution for .NET Test that will be more integrated, that will be more native to testing platform, but we are not there yet. But when we will be replacing again this experience very cautiously. So stay tuned. Then let's switch to Visual Studio. And so here in Visual Studio, I have Test Explorer. I will go and run my tests. And again, as we will hopefully see in a second, the tests pass, they are all green. And also in this case, we are leaning back onto the current experience with VSTest. But again, we are working on a new experience that will be more native to the testing platform, that will have less overhead and so on inside of Visual Studio. And so we will be shipping that under a preview flag, maybe in 17.13 Visual Studio or maybe earlier. Let's see. So in summary, the testing platform enabled projects are still usable in Visual Studio. They're still usable in .NET Test. You can migrate to the new testing platform right now, try it out, and then fall back onto VSTest under those other scenarios to run your tests. So you don't have to break everything just to be able to try the new thing. And that's it. That's all my demos. So in summary, we would love your feedback. We would love your ideas, improvements, your issues. You can file all of them on the Microsoft/testfx. This is the same repo where MSTest is living and where now the new platform is living. And we have discussions enabled. We have issues enabled, of course. And so you do you. You can choose whatever works for you. Share the feedback, share the ideas with us. We are very happy to listen. So that's everything that I have. Thank you very much for listening. And please go and download .NET 9 today because it's released and it's amazing. Thank you.